The pandemic has affected the whole world with such speed that it shows how much the world is one system. It has affected all economies because they are interconnected by trade, transport, and migration. But it has unequally afflicted the demos, the people themselves, their chances of survival, their livelihoods. The people are suffering the pandemic according to pre existing unequal arrangements in all parts of the world. For instance, the inegalitarian health systems in each country and the unequal health expenditures across the countries. So, this reveals that epidemics and health flow through channels that already exist. No sickness can determine its own pathways. We can recall what Kant said, there is no thing in itself. Similarly, there is no sickness in itself, no pathos noumenon. And this reveals the ways in which we are responsible for the arrangements that have provided the conditions for the present suffering. To begin with, the pandemic reveals something about the meaning of crisis that we rarely attend to. The etymology of crisis derives from the Greek verb krenein, which means tearing, dividing, but also distributing. So it carries the medical sense of a wound, but also the aesthetic sense of distribution and arrangement. We often think of a crisis in its medical sense, and so the pandemic appears or the virus appears as a sudden wound in an otherwise wholesome body. Some think that it's the revenge of nature, just as earlier plagues were thought to be divine punishments. Others think that the virus is the agent of the autolysis of an evil world. But such attributions of good and evil to nature are hypophysical, and there is a danger in thinking that a pre-existing state of affairs must be restored, be it economic or cultural or natural. Instead, the pandemic reveals the other sense of crisis. That is, how the processes that have governed, that have organized our lives are distributed across the world, and how some components of this arrangement, worldwide arrangement, have arrived at their functional limits. For instance, the techno-economic components have failed to ensure that the poorest people can access hospitals, that they can meaningfully practice isolation, that they do not starve. But on the other hand, there is another component that has become our primary hope, namely the research into the virus, the search for vaccines and medicines, and the efforts for their speedy production. So this crisis is increasingly bringing into view the following task: how to imagine and build a new arrangement that will comprehend better functioning components to distribute the good to everyone, everywhere. And the biggest danger revealed by the crisis is that we will ignore this worldwide dimension. First, we should start by looking at the world as it is presenting itself in its failures and also in its new possibilities, and not confine ourselves to the daydreams of local self-sufficiency and local assertions. That would be worse than the confinement which circumstances have already imposed on us and which have been so poorly executed across the world. We have suffered the persistent tendencies of competitive regionalisms, ethnocentrisms, and nationalisms even before the pandemic. And these tendencies have been only augmented in many countries today. We must recognize these diverse racisms as systemic and institutional practices that are making people suffer unequally. They are endangering the doctors and medical staff, journalists, refugees, minorities, and also the majority populations who are subjugated and exploited and are excluded from political participation and from knowledge creation. These are the most significant reasons for the neglect of public health and of non-commercial scientific research, and also for the cultivated apathy towards laborers, migrants, and refugees. Here's looking at the world. Today, it connects everyone and everything in unprecedented and reciprocal ways. Then we must recognize ourselves as the world, and we must call and answer to the world as the world. This is the meaning of democracy today, in which we must all participate equally. And democracy can now be secured only through the assertion that the world belongs to all. We have passively witnessed a global agreement on most economic processes and on technological protocols and standards, and there are global institutions dictating terms to national governments. The people are not consulted in these decisions, and they are encouraged to preoccupy themselves in regional cultural issues which sustain populisms. We must change this. The care of a complex and dynamic worldwide arrangement is impossible without developing the collective faculty of imagination. Certainly, we will have to invent and practice new forms of deceleration and acceleration in our lives, but the only ethical and practical way of doing this is by imagining these modifications collectively. I must unambiguously say this: unlike those on the left and the right who are calling for the burning down of the modern bridges of transport, communication systems, economic cooperation, and technologies, we must insist on the democratic future of this one world system. But as we prepare for the future, there's something that philosophy cautions us. The world is not an infinitely malleable matter that we can freely mold according to our world picture, whether through technological exuberance or hyperphysical discipline. It is impossible to catch everything in the net of our prior expectations and abilities. That would be to pretend to decide the destiny of the world. The truth is that everything finds its limits or its override through new components and new arrangements. We will be surprised by the futures of our own inventions. Future ruins will demand new constructions from us. And that is why our flights are indestinate.